Hello, my name is Lawrence Turner, and welcome to week 5 of the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library and Nonprofit Services Real World Crash Course. I'm a librarian at South County Regional Library and work with the Nonprofit Services team, which is coordinating tonight's program. The Real World Crash series is a 6-part series offering pragmatic tips from experts in the nonprofit sector. These programs are held on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Tonight's program is entitled Meet Your Neighbors, Connecting with Your Community Foundation, which will answer the questions of how to build bridges, make effective relationships, and connect as a nonprofit with grant makers. Advice will be provided by guests Keva Womble and Whitney Feld. We greatly appreciate their time and commitment for this effort and thank Foundation for the Carolinas for their participation. We encourage all to ask questions during the question and answer period, and beyond that, questions may be asked throughout this evening. So if you have questions that you do want to ask at the moment, it will be fine to go ahead and type it in so that they might be shared and they can be responded to when those questions come to you. I will begin, however, with an introduction of our guests, Keva and Whitney. Keva Womble is the Senior Vice President of Community Programs. Keva is the Senior Vice President of Community Programs at Foundation for the Carolinas. In her position, Keva leads and provides insights for FFTCS's regional affiliate and scholarship teams. Her additional responsibilities include relationship management for the Charlotte Mecklenburg Community Foundation, Foundation for a Healthy Carolina, various relief initiatives, responding to community crisis, and the Thrive Fund, which makes strategic investments in local arts. In addition, she oversees the foundation's internal equity and inclusion work that creates space for education, reflection, intentionality, advancing a welcoming environment for all staff to contribute and leading with equity in all of the foundation's work. Prior to joining the foundation, Keva worked in the public education sector as Director of Grant Innovation for Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools. Her philanthropy career includes more than 20 years of corporate and community foundation grant making in Michigan, Arizona, and North Carolina, beginning with JP Morgan Chase and the Arizona Community Foundation. Keva is a graduate of the Community Building Institute, Leadership Development Initiative Class 19, an alum of Valley Leadership in Arizona, and earned a MBA from the University of Phoenix.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Whitney Feld serves as the Vice President, Family Offices Partners at Foundation for the Carolinas. In her role, Whitney serves the needs of the Foundation for the Carolinas clients with family offices and family-owned businesses. During her tenure at FFTC, most of her client work has been with individuals and families on current giving strategies, legacy planning, and multi-generational family engagement and grant making. Additionally, she provides custom board and grant services for clients running competitive grant making programs. She also assists with the Center for professional philanthropy, programming, and the Foundation's continuing legal education courses. Whitney began with FFTC, has been she's been with FFTC since 2017, originally serving as the Assistant Vice President of Development for the Robinson Center for Civic Leadership. She holds a BFA from Miami University and MST from Pace University and a JD from the Charleston School of Law. Whitney is a member of the American Bar Association, the North Carolina Bar Association, and currently sits on the board of the Mint Museum of Art Collections. She previously served as on the boards of North Carolina's Association of Women Attorneys, Promising Pages, and the Founders Circle. Whitney completed the CFP certification program at Queen's University in 2020. Everyone, please welcome Keva and Whitney for this evening's program. You may begin.
Wonderful. And thank you for sharing our PowerPoint presentation. When you have a moment, while we're pulling that up, we would love to hear who is in the room joining us, what your backgrounds are, the institutions you come from. Keva and I are really looking forward to speaking with you and sharing a little bit about the Community Foundation space, and then more specifically, Foundation for the Carolinas. So we'll take a couple of moments just to give you some time to share your background. And while you're doing that, next slide, please, I'll talk a little bit about the field of community foundations. So as Lawrence mentioned, I've worked at Foundation for the Carolinas for the past 4 years. And what he did not share is that I previously worked at the Coastal Community Foundation in Charleston, South Carolina. So with that in mind, I don't need to say that I'm a little biased, but I do believe that community foundations are special places with a rich history in the United States. Cleveland Community Foundation was the first, established well over 100 years ago in 1914, and now there are over 100 community foundations scattered across the United States, and they represent a sizable philanthropic investment. We'll talk a little bit more about Foundation for the Carolinas specifically, but we are the 6th largest with total assets at around $3 billion owned or represented. That doesn't tell the whole story, though, and we'll touch on this a little bit more granularly, but we're 27th when it comes to discretionary assets. And what that means is assets that we're able to grant at our discretion or at our behest. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons that I love community foundations is that we're place-based. So at our best, we build community trust and we broker regional solutions that will help both now and we hope into the future. We seek to empower donors at every level to think thoughtfully about their giving and to provide information about unique community landscape. Ultimately, we hope that this guidance drives impact, bringing people and resources together to address social, educational, economic, environment, and cultural changes unique to our community. We believe that by providing our clients and the broader community with resources, we can help solve some of our region's most pressing issues, and hopefully not just for today. One of the advantages of community foundations is that as we build our discretionary assets, we have the opportunity to respond to currently unknowable issues that may occur in the future. We hope community foundations are enduring and always able to respond to community needs. Next slide, and I'll turn it over to Keva.
Thank you, Whitney. And we're taking this time intentionally to really share what a community foundation is. And we love our work, but we also have to remember that everyone doesn't actually understand our infrastructure or how we started. And so this historical information is really important to share with you, and also to talk about the evolution of the role of community foundations. And so this next slide will go over a little bit of that. And so we now also serve as a convener to begin those conversations, as Whitney talked about in responding, and providing navigation to looking at those financial gaps that exist for our most pressing community needs. And I'll talk and share some information later about our civic engagement work that we've done via our Robinson Center for Civic Leadership. And so that's where we like to also lean into discussions with our local community leaders, look at data sources that are currently available, and also collaborating with other resources in our region. It's also important that we provide engagement opportunities for that critical dialogue, and it's more important than ever to have voices reflective at the community at the center of these discussions. So another role we play is building bridges and being a network and connecting leadership from grassroots emerging organizations to those larger institutional, longer standing agencies and crossing sectors. So looking at our corporate partners and also what's happening in our public spaces. So with that, thinking about working with our municipal and county partners and truly fostering that spirit of collaboration and maximizing existing resources that we do have. So another area that we take pride in is leveraging and raising private dollars. So our work in mitigating areas such as the affordable housing crisis and responding to the pandemic that we're still enduring right now. And reaching out directly to social service agencies and asking them, what is their capacity, especially during this time of the pandemic? How have they been able to pivot? Have they needed to repurpose? And are they serving their constituents safely and adjusting to remote outreach? Also, another role that we're beginning to play is advocacy and taking a closer look at systems and policies that do create barriers, and being accountable to our community. And that's one thing that we want to do as a community foundation, as your community foundation, is to be accountable and being great stewards of dollars that have been gifted to us in our discretionary efforts and measuring that impact. We're taking a really close look at our evaluation tools and our methods and how we work with our nonprofit awardees, and also looking at removing any pain points or burdens to those grantees so that we can capture their stories and their outcomes. Next slide, please. And I'll hand it over. Oh, actually, I'll take this one. So our mission at Foundation for the Carolinas. And so we pride ourselves again on inspiring philanthropy and empowering individuals to create a better community. And so we were established in 1958. We have a 13 county region, which I'll share a map with you so you can really grasp the idea of where we're serving. What does our footprint look like? We have, as Whitney stated, over $3 billion in assets, and we hold nearly 3,000 funds. And so that's one thing that's important to talk about is our total assets, and then what is restricted and what is also discretionary. And I'll take a moment to talk about that briefly. We have volunteer leadership in our governing board of directors, as well as our regions across our footprint. And we also have a staff size of more than 80 individuals with specialized expertise. Next slide, please. And so here is that mapping of our regional footprint. And as you'll see, Charlotte-Mecklenburg is in the center, and all of our regional affiliate sites are less than a 2 hours drive from Charlotte. So all of our staff are Charlotte-based. However, they are working closely with volunteer boards that are made up of residents that live in those respective communities. So we lean on them for that knowledge of what is happening in those respective communities. And so I will go back when I talked about that $3 billion of assets. There are endowment funds in all of these regional affiliates. And so about 7% of our overall asset base is in discretionary grant making. So now we begin to narrow down what is available for our competitive grant making. Next slide, please.
Well, and speaking about the enduring value of the foundation and community foundations like us, we wanted to highlight some, and this is just a smattering, but of the really significant gifts that have been given over the years. So certainly Lucille Giles always comes to mind when we talk about people who have had an enduring legacy and impact. It was a $35 million estate gift that was made in 1996. And $56 million has been distributed in less than 25 years. yet the corpus remains intact. So when we talk about the long-term benefit, this is a perfect example or a prime illustration of that. It is the primary source of Charlotte-based discretionary grants, and that is largely led by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Community Foundation, which is a board of community leaders who are helping to oversee these dollars and ensure that they are responsive to the most pressing needs across our community at present. The sort of parameters of this fund were general, charitable, educational, and recreational needs in Charlotte. So, of course, it's always important that we're honoring donor intent. In this particular case, there was wide discretion given in terms of Ms. Giles's intent. Robert Cole is a great example of somebody who's within our regional footprint. So it was a $20 million gift to the foundation in 1989, and it was established for Richmond County. There's 33 million in the corpus today, and to date it's awarded over $34 million in grants. So again, just tremendous grant making power. Nell Rose Bates was a CMS school teacher for 40 years. I love highlighting this story. It's so incredible. She made a $1.2 million bequest in 2009 with a focus on housing and underprivileged children in Charlotte. And so, we really do work with a broad range of donors with different interests and different capacity. And, we hope that their legacy is an enduring one. Next slide.
And as Whitney stated, that diverse interest of portfolio funds that we do have, it's really important, and I'm proud to highlight our African American Community Foundation, which is more than 25 years old now and has awarded more than $500,000 in grants to over 85 local nonprofits right here in our community. And so we had two wonderful benefactors who wanted to leave behind a legacy specifically for supporting work in the African American community. And those wonderful women are Alethea Jones Henderson. And unfortunately, we do not have a picture of her. And I don't think we've been able to find any archives with a picture of her, but she was a hairdresser by training and then established her endowment in 1981, specifically for the health needs in the African American community. And also Elizabeth Randolph, also affectionately known as Libby Randolph, who was a CMS administrator, humanitarian, and educator, and established her endowment in 1993. And her initiatives were to foster philanthropy and support nonprofits and organizations, again, in the African American community. So we're very proud of that work. And we have a volunteer board who continues to be stewards of those funds today. Usually there is a grant cycle for this fund specifically early in the year. And so this year they're taking a look at what other efforts and programs would be helpful to build capacity, provide resources for Black-led and Black-serving organizations. And so there are some announcements to be made later this year that we're really excited about.
And I'm loving these comments that I'm seeing. So wonderful to know that Ms. Randolph has a community room named for her at the Allegra Westbrooks Regional Library on Beatties Ford Road. So keep the comments coming. We love that you've joined with us, and we want to make this as interactive as possible. Next slide. So we thought, after highlighting some specific illustrations of endowment funds and the folks who importantly started them, that it might be helpful to get into the specifics around what are endowment funds and how do we determine spendable at Foundation for the Carolinas. This is a question that arises quite often, so both from our clients who want to better understand the process and also, of course, community members and nonprofits like you all. So endowments are designed to keep the principal intact while also empowering these funds to make significant impact within community through their grant making. So the spending policy really determines the annual amount available for distribution or for grant making, leaving sufficient assets for the fund to grow. And the idea here, right, is that it's a long-term investment in community. So it is both responding to the needs today, but also going to be intact to respond to the needs that are in the future within the parameters established by the original donor. Next slide, please. So at Foundation for the Carolinas, we have several different fund types, and this is really specific to the continuum of endowments. So everything from non-endowed, and this is the bulk of the types of funds that we hold. So most of our funds are non-endowed. And what that means is that 100% of the principal is available for distribution. There is no, payout required if it's a donor advised fund, of course. So it's maximum flexibility. If you want to treat it as an endowment, you have the flexibility to do so, but there are no restrictions and no parameters around the amount that you can grant out. Quasi-endowed is treated like an endowed fund for investment purposes, and clients who elect that level do receive a spendable calculation, so they know sort of what the parameters are if they want to protect the corpus of their fund. But it offers flexibility for principal distribution. So clients who elect this option often like to know what the recommendation is, and then, again, they still have the flexibility to grant more if they would like to do so. And then the minority of our funds are endowed funds, meaning that these funds are restricted to only spend the spendable rate that's set on an annual basis. The idea being, again, that it's a long-term vehicle meant to exist in perpetuity and to preserve the principal. Next slide. So at a really high level, how is Spendable determined? So it's governed by the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. It provides uniform rules for investment decisions and spending standards, and allows funds to spend below the sort of historic dollar value of the fund. What I would say about this is not a Foundation for the Carolinas rule. This is something that applies to any endowed fund. Next slide. So there's really 7 factors under the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. The box it looks like a little bit off center, but it's, duration and preservation of the endowment fund, the purposes of the institution in the endowment funds, or general economic conditions, possible effect of inflation or deflation, expected total return for income and appreciation of investments, other resources of the institution or of the fund, and then the investment policy of the institution. And I would say 3 through 5 are weighted most heavily. Next slide. So, the total return objective is to preserve the purchasing power of the fund's assets and to support the spendable policy. So total returns are sort of net investment earnings. And the total return objective is then compared to expected returns, for our pools in this particular case. So it's, spending policy plus inflation plus administrative fees, and you wouldn't want to invade the corpus of the fund is the idea. So next slide. So this year, our spending policy is set at 4.5%, and that's really aligned with most of our peer community foundations. So it's, spending policy if inflation is predicted to be at 2.2%, let's say, plus fees at around 1%, then you have to expect that investment returns are going to be right at around 7.7% in order to not, invade the principal. And then, you can sort of see what our most diversified pool returns are. And so, I share this to say that I think the foundation and our governing board and our investment committee really wanted to take all of this into consideration, but also take into consideration the needs of the community at this moment. And so it is a balance of these things, right? It is a balance of the duty to these long-term funds in order to preserve the corpus and keep them intact over the long haul, as was the wish of the donor, but also, right, to meet the needs of the community, which at present, because of COVID, are significant. And so there was, in particular this year, a lot of discussion about what is the right number and should it be lowered, or should, given this calculus that I'm sharing with you. And, ultimately the decision was to keep it steady at 4.5%. Next slide. So, I think here's a good opportunity to pause. That was pretty technical, and I ran through it quickly because that may not have been what you came for, but I did want to sort of set the stage and go over that because I think it's important to understand, some of the parameters that control our funds and how much they're able to grant out. But, Keva and I welcome questions if you have them.
So as I'll allow my colleague to take a breath because she is just such an expert in her field, and I love listening to her. We thought it was really important to share with you how it's determined every year, how much gets awarded in terms of our discretionary grant making. And that's not something that's general information. It's in that we want to make sure we share, and that is transparent. But most organizations that are applying for those dollars don't know that there is a formula we actually do use from year to year to award out our grants. So we thank you for giving us that space and time to share that. And so what we have listed here, and I don't see any questions yet, what we have listed here are just a short list of some of our open grant cycles that are available if you log on to our fftc.org grants portal, which our website is very easy to navigate. And so you just go through our menu option to find grants. And I would welcome that you visit that website at any time just to kind of check in to see who has an open call for applications. And so this is a short list again of what currently is available or coming up. And so just wanted to show that our geographic reach with some of our competitive grant making, as well as those focus areas and a schedule. And so right now, today, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Community Foundation does have a grant cycle that has closed recently, but we are reviewing applications. And so I'm not sure if there are any of the organizations that have logged on that have applied, but we'll ask for your patience as we read through those applications, and we'll be making awards in June. So it looks like we may have a couple.
Yes, I love these questions. So I'm glad that you thought that the parameters and the numbers were helpful. We do want to be transparent, and in case you are really excited about my spendable conversation, there is a webinar that gets into much more significant depth than I did, available on our website, so feel free to check it out. The next question is a great one. So what is the most important piece of advice you would give to grant seekers? I'll answer it, and then Keva, I'll turn it over to you. I think it's probably worth, we both have, a slightly different vantage point at the foundation. So what I would say, Jeremy, is that leverage us. We are a resource here. We want to help support you. So I help serve the team that administers the Longleaf Fund, and my colleague Ayana and I are both more than happy to review grant applications, to give you feedback, to try to help you craft it in a way that we know is going to align with the donor's particular interests. So if you can keep a close eye on our grant making cycles, that one actually has a press release that goes out. And, reach out to us well in advance of the deadline. We are pleased to offer support. The other thing that I would say is just brevity is helpful. So I found, that trying to really tell your story as concisely as possible goes a long way with a lot of my clients. To give some context, I just printed for the Longleaf Fund their applications for Charlotte alone, and it was around 500 pages. I'm actually embarrassed to even admit that, but I think the brevity piece can be helpful.
And I love this question because the one thing in all of my years of serving as a grant funder is guiding nonprofits and agencies to find the right fit when it comes to a grant. So there are folks who are grant chasers, and I would really state to be careful in identifying where you have alignment. If there's any question, always reach out to the funder, know your funder, know what the focus areas are, and if there's any question at all, the best thing to do is pick up the phone, and on our website, you'll find all of our email addresses and our phone numbers. We're working remotely right now, but we are responding right away. So the best advice I could give is just knowing who you're working with in terms of a request, and understanding it's okay that it may not be the right fit, that just continue to stay the course, and there will be a funder that you can align with, but always ask questions. Another piece of advice that I would give would be to allow the funders to get to know you. Unfortunately, we are unable to make site visits. Pre-COVID, we did have a process in place where we could welcome organizations into our building and bring our staff in front of them and allow them to have a presentation. And we are looking at how to bring that opportunity back. But in the meantime, we are responding to emails and to phone calls. And there's so much great work that is happening in community. And unfortunately, we're a smaller staff. We don't know everything that's happening. And so the biggest thing is to be your own cheerleader and champion and reach out to us and let us get to know you.
I agree 100%, Keva. And there's another question: what are the biggest pitfalls you see grant seekers fall into? And along with that question, and the one previously asked, I would say not seeking feedback. So if you aren't awarded a grant, don't be shy about reaching out and asking for us to give you feedback. Sometimes we may not have feedback to give. Maybe our clients didn't give us a great indication as to why they made a decision one way or the other. But oftentimes we do, perhaps have some helpful feedback that we're more than happy to share. We do try to reach out to everyone who applied and give them an indication as to why they were or they were not selected. But with some of our larger programs, that's harder to do on a really detailed scale. And so, I think following up and asking for time with us to better understand why the client didn't respond to the proposal is a great idea, and something that folks probably don't leverage often enough.
And I'll add to that again, and it's related to my previous comment. I think about when organizations, especially in the time of a pandemic where you don't have your fundraising opportunities as you normally would in person, and it's more competitive than ever when you're seeking funding. If there is a funder who has a focus area that can be similar to some of the work that you're doing, but it then does require you to add on a program which you really don't have capacity to, please don't do that. I'll give an example. If there is a grant opportunity for a financial literacy program and your core services is after school enrichment, if there is no alignment, don't take it upon yourself to try and attempt and to create that. Stick to what you do best for your core services and reach out to us, because sometimes there are opportunities with some of our donor advised fund holders where we can share and take back information to them. And so that will be the biggest pitfall, is attempting to fit who you are into what focus areas are of a specific funder.
I agree wholeheartedly. Any other questions before we move on to the next slide?
Okay.
So next slide, and I want to distinguish on this next slide from the previous. So we were initially talking about our open grant cycles, and if it was not clear, what we mean by that are grant programs that anyone in the community can apply to, as long as, to Keva's point, they align with the mission and the work and the parameters of the grant making program. Closed grant cycles, by contrast, are formal cycles. So they're clients who've elected to place the same level of rigor and formality around their giving as those open grant cycles, but they are by invitation only, meaning it's not open. You have to be invited in order to apply. So you can see the listing here of some of those funds. And a couple of things, that I want to highlight. They sort of happen at all different periods of time throughout the year. They have very different focus areas. They have pretty distinct geographic regions. So this is also another benefit of reaching out to the staff at Foundation for the Carolinas to better understand what might be grant programs that align with your work. And we'll help you navigate that and try to be as transparent as we possibly can. For these clients, because you have to be invited, there's a slightly different process for each of them, as you might imagine. But a lot of them accept letters of inquiry. So, very brief, one page, maybe two, sort of front and back, that highlights your mission, your work, your priorities for the year, what your ask is. We like to be granular. So how much are you seeking? And then we share that with the client or with the family, and they review it. And that's part of their process in determining who they would like to invite to apply. Now, even that process can be quite competitive. And so, I think getting feedback throughout the process, getting feedback from us after the process, if you weren't in fact invited to apply, is really helpful. To give a little bit of context to this, the Springsteen Foundation receives over 100 letters of inquiry on an annual basis because of their broad geographic parameters serving North and South Carolina, and because their focus areas are health, human services, and education. But just because you aren't invited for one cycle doesn't mean that you won't be in the future. And it's really good to keep in touch. The other thing that I will say, and I think it's particularly relevant here, although probably for all of our grant cycles, is, do some research on the family. So to the extent that you can find out who the clients are, figure out what they're interested in. What are they doing in the community? Where else have they made grants in the past? Again, we can help you do some of that and are happy to do so. But it's also, good to see, is there anyone on your board that has a connection to the family? Is there a personal connection that you can make? Oftentimes that goes a really long way if they have that personal connection.
Great. And it looks like we have some new comments in the chat. And Chuck Jones, I do appreciate your comment there. Partner with Commonwealth Charlotte instead if you are needing to add on a financial literacy program. And I would concur with that. We love collaborations and see nonprofits working together and leveraging one another and comprehensively serving the community. So yes, Chuck, I would agree with that. Jeremy, you've also highlighted a question here, especially with COVID, things changed rapidly. Can you share a story where someone got a grant but wasn't able to perform what they initially said they would, but were able to successfully pivot it? And I would say we experienced a little bit of this last year, and that's where grace plays a big role, and for us as funders being flexible. And so yes, there were a number of agencies that did apply for fundings with intentions of maybe hosting summer programs for students, or most of their outreach was in person. And so lots of agencies needed to be nimble and quickly pivot to delivering services remotely. And then maybe they were already running on very much a thin budget. And it came to the point where they were not prepared because maybe they didn't have technology themselves. We talked about the digital divide for students and families, where some of our nonprofit agencies weren't set up and prepared for that. So that's where it comes into having a conversation with the funder. And I think of us, give us a call right away. We did have some reallocation requests come in, and where it definitely made sense, we wanted to support that. So we saw where some agencies were stating that they needed to expend dollars in a different way so that they could keep their doors open or serve in a remote capacity. So that's it's a broad example, but it's a real example of what we did see happen, and maybe where there was a little bit of shifting and an agency needed to greatly reduce staff for a moment, or they were dependent on a heavy volunteer base but needed to find a different way to again reach out to their clients. So we wanted to be supportive of that. So it's picking up the phone, having a conversation with us. So Whitney, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And I would add, that I hope that this is where, as a community foundation and in this field, we can be a really powerful advocate and ally of yours. So last year was really inspiring in my work with my clients, particularly those who have elected to run these more formal grant cycles. The fact that they were open to feedback on the types of awards that they give and unrestricting them, and being willing to give general operating support, knowing that things were really dramatically different than they typically are. I hope that some of those lessons will continue even post-COVID. But, I had great conversations with a lot of nonprofit partners and was grateful for the trust placed in me and the transparency shared. And we do try to convey that and advocate for you in these meetings. We know that we're privileged to get to be in the room with these folks. And we really do hope that we can get our clients to think differently about how they may be interacting, with the nonprofit sector.
Great. I think we can probably go to the next slide. And this is our last slide of our formal PowerPoint presentation, and we certainly want this to continue to be conversational, but we thought it was important when we talk again about the evolution of community foundations and the roles that we play. I'd like to share with you, and hopefully some of you are very familiar with our civic engagement work. And so wanted to just go over several items that have efforts that have recently occurred. And when I think about our work with leading on opportunity, and so hopefully you all have become familiar with the task force report that was released back in March of 2017. And we really leaned into our community partners. And when I state that, those leaders that are from community who are not the usual folks that are called to roundtables to identify what are the most pressing community needs, but folks really from community, from public sector, from private sector, from leaders in their own respective neighborhoods. And we pulled them together to create some recommendations to address that economic mobility gap that we were experiencing, and that we became 50 out of 50. And so looking at those vulnerable areas and what was needed to be put in place, I'm really happy to state that it's become a playbook. You never know when you release a report what will happen with it, but that report really has become a playbook for funders taking note and looking at what those recommendations are and responding to that way. And so also Leading on Opportunity is now an actual agency, and so Sherry Chisholm is the director of that organization. And so that's one area of work that we've done. Also addressing the affordable housing crisis. And so hopefully most of you are aware that Foundation for the Carolinas started the privately financed Charlotte Housing Opportunity Investment Fund back in spring of 2018 with a $5 million program related investment, which was the largest of its kind in FFTC's history. And so thanks to so many generous donors, that fund has exceeded $50 million in fundraising. And also, it was followed by the City of Charlotte's placement of a successful $50 million bond referendum on the ballot back in 2018. So that helped to boost the publicly financed housing trust fund. So that's one area. Also, A Way Home, which is a public-private initiative between the City of Charlotte and Foundation for the Carolinas, became a $26 million endowment, which directly helps homeless and vulnerable families in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. And so the whole purpose was to think about moving them toward housing and financial independence. So it provided some housing subsidies and supportive services, and it still exists today. Also our universal pre-K work. And so hopefully some of you have learned about that. It reached $6.2 million in fundraising from the private sector to support Mecklenburg County's MEC Pre-K initiative. And so that's just really exciting when we talk about early education and preparing our students for entry into the school system. And so that's looking at pre-K education for all 4-year-olds. And so those dollars were used to support pre-K teachers studying at local colleges and universities. And one last area, actually there are two areas I'd like to highlight. One particularly is our disaster relief efforts. And so a few years ago, we had so many generous individuals and corporate partners that wanted to support when Hurricane Florence hit our coastal communities. We have sunsetted that fund, and very proud of the work of the agencies that received dollars from that. But as we continue to navigate this pandemic, we were able to partner with United Way of Central Carolinas to launch our COVID-19 Response Fund back in the early days of the pandemic last year, which seems like forever ago, but just 12 months ago, really. And so that was more than $20 million was raised for that fund, again, from our corporate partners, from individuals, from local governments. And so to date, we've supported many nonprofits with funding so that they could deliver basic essential needs such as housing, food, emergency financial assistance, childcare, legal advocacy, and even more. And so that was some great work. And also it was replicated outside of Mecklenburg County in some of our regional affiliate regions, particularly in Cabarrus, Iredell, and Union counties, as well as York County. So wanted to share that the work we do in Mecklenburg, there's also great work that is happening in our other regional affiliates. And so lastly, one area that we are working on is our racial equity and social justice work. And so hopefully you all have seen on our website our published statement that was announced, which still lives there today after the killing of George Floyd last summer, where we talk about the acknowledgement of systemic racism and listing actionable steps that we're taking. And we've created a list, a non-exhaustive list of organizations to connect with, that we're encouraging individuals to connect with and or support their work in this space. And we've also listed some educational resources as anyone would like to learn more in this racial equity and social justice space. So we're listening, we're reflecting, and we continue to work with partners to develop opportunities of learning for our team members as well as our donors. And so wanted to just share that with you, with some of the work that we're doing as well. And Whitney, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that.
No, just, really proud of the civic initiatives. I definitely think that our work with clients is strengthened as a result of many of these initiatives and helps to empower them to think about how they're giving and the ways in which they're giving. We have a question that I don't think we addressed from Jeremy, which was, what advice would you give someone trying to get on the invite-only list? Mm-hmm. And I want to touch on that because I think it applies not only for getting on the invite-only list, but it also really applies to how to approach getting in front of those elusive donor-advised fund clients who are not running competitive grant-making programs. So, what I would say is there's sort of open grant cycles, right? There's the closed grant cycles that are by invitation only. Those are the minority of the grant making programs that we're running. The vast majority of the funds that we hold are really almost like philanthropic checkbooks, where folks are giving independently, to causes and organizations that they care about without a lot of input from us as advisors. But here's the caveat and how I hope my advice will be important, right? We are meeting with these folks ideally on at least an annual basis. We'd love more often, but typically at least once a year. And one of the great joys of working in a community foundation is getting to be a broker of relationships and taking nonprofits that are doing work that is aligned with our clients' values and interests to them so that they can get to know organizations in the community. And so, to your question, I think reaching out, asking for a meeting, sharing information about what you're doing, trusting us, following up with us is really helpful. So, typically to get really granular about the process is once we've had that meeting, you've shared follow-up information sort of based on the guidance that we give you. We share that with the clients that are running those closed cycles. They make an election and have their own process as to whether or not they want to find out more, schedule a meeting of their own. Again, it looks a little bit different based on the client. But also, when we receive that information, we share it across our relationship management team and across our teams. So not just within philanthropic advancement, but also with community programs team. And we really do try to think about, is there a grant making program that we didn't recognize or realize that we should follow up with? Is there a client that has a standard donor advised fund but has aligned interests that we can make an introduction to? And sometimes it's not immediate. And so it is really helpful as things change on your end or there's a new initiative to follow up with us and to provide us with those updates. It's never a bother. We love hearing from you. We want to know what's going on in our community. As Keva said, we try to keep a really close watch and know as much as we possibly can, but it's really helpful when you're an active partner in that work with us. And I'm always amazed. I'll share information about a nonprofit with a client who I think has aligned interests. Nothing will materialize immediately. And then 6 months down the road, they'll follow up and they'll say, Whitney, you mentioned this nonprofit that's doing great work in financial literacy. Can you make an introduction? Sometimes they just make a grant and I never know that it happened or that it was a result of a conversation that we had. So, we do want to make sure that we're making those bridges and building those bridges, making those connections. And we know that it can be hard, sometimes to navigate how to best access, our clients who, again, have those more sort of standard services and aren't running a grant making cycle.
And I'd like to welcome any further questions as Whitney and that was our last slide, but we certainly are here to have dialogue. And I think it's important to consider as agencies are seeking funding at this time. if for some reason you are declined, understand that we always wish we had more discretionary dollars to make more awards. And so it's not necessarily about something that was wrong in your application, or that you are not the right fit. I would just encourage that you stay the course, apply again, and look to see again what open opportunities are available. So particularly with our Charlotte Mecklenburg Community Fund, there are some agencies that probably are eligible based on the focus areas for all 3 grant cycles that we do host throughout the year. And that may require a conversation, because I may make a suggestion of which grant cycle I would suggest that you pursue, instead of just going over all 3 of them. And so I would say just reach out to us. We certainly welcome conversations. We love to get to know you, and then tell us authentically who you are in terms of your agency. And don't worry about it's funny, while I was with the school district and applying for federal funds, you really had to get into logic models. You really had to get in to looking at studies. And so we're not asking for that. We really want to know what's your impact in community, how you're great at what you do, how you determine success, how you find that success, what other partners are you working with. And so that's what we're interested in getting to know. And we don't want you to spend the time again creating some logic model and doing all these quotes in the grant application, but using those specific spaces which you have limited characters and restricted word counts for responding. And some of those is just sharing the compelling story of the great work that you all are doing.
Okay, I'm back. Everything that you've shared has been great information for us, and we really appreciate it. Let me ask about the work that you do, and as far as actually getting coverage from the media. Do you ever feel that you could probably stand to get some more, or how do people find out about what is going on with FFTC if they're not surfing on the web all the time? How do they hear about it?
So we do have a pretty robust website, and we are getting more active on our social media. So we're posting more to LinkedIn and Instagram. So those are great places to follow us as well. I'm old fashioned, so I still think reaching out via email is probably the best way to get in touch. And, we can share in the chat our contact information. It's, in my case, W Feld, my last name, at fftc.org. And all of the emails are listed on our website.
I would agree with Whitney, and our communications team does an amazing job with archiving press releases and where we've received coverage in the past. And so that information continues to be on our website. And even if you're interested in looking at what competitive grants we've made previously, we are transparent when it comes to that, listing all of those agencies and dollar amounts. So that information is readily available for anyone to take a look at as well.
Okay. All right. And I guess along those lines, I'll kind of throw it out as far as having a truly emergency situation for, and I can't recall the name of the nonprofit, but I remember watching the late news last night before, and there was a quick story about a nonprofit organization that was in dire need of funds. Otherwise, the doors would shut for them in probably 30 days or so. Is there any way that an agency in that type of situation could be helped?
I definitely think a discussion is warranted, because there are many factors surrounding what could be going on, and if there is also another way to remedy the situation. So it's really case by case, which is what I love, that our services are evolving in terms of serving the greater community. So we need more specifics probably around that, and then bringing in some of our leadership team members as well as our other partners, just to identify how we can support if it's reasonable and feasible.
And I think the only thing I would add to that is, we shared early on that our discretionary assets are more limited, but if we aren't able to help with our discretionary assets, we do frequently reach out to clients who we know have aligned interests and make phone calls and see if there's an interest in supporting, particularly if it's an emergency type situation. So I certainly have reached out to clients when an opportunity that was unforeseen arises to see. And again, it's not at our discretion, but we're certainly happy to bring it up and present it to our clients to see if they're willing.
Okay. And I think in particular with the news story that I heard, it was pretty much said that they needed like, such and such an amount of money. I don't know, maybe $25,000. I don't know, but something like that was thrown out there. So it really was kind of put out there for the public to know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. Let me ask, at one point in one of the slides where there was a lot of discussion, it said, I believe that spending level was at 4.5 for the year. Is that right? As far as keeping it steady? Am I right about that?
So that is just for our endowed fund. So if you sort of think about the full range of funds that we hold at Foundation for the Carolinas, a very small percentage are left to our discretion. Separate from that conversation, a very small percentage of our funds are endowed, and only our endowed funds are restricted by the spendable rate, meaning that they can't spend beyond 4.5%. The reason that it's 4.5% is to protect that corpus so that the fund can exist in perpetuity and continue to serve the region, our community, forever and respond to pressing needs we couldn't possibly foresee currently. But that is truly a minority of the funds that we hold. So most of our funds are not endowed. And many of our funds, it's a great question, many of our funds spend 100%. So it's just an annual contribution that they're making on an annual basis. And the reason that they're leveraging a DAF in that instance is really for tracking purposes, so that over the years they can see where they've granted, and it's efficient in that they only have to pull one tax statement. But they are, let's say putting $10,000 in their fund, granting out the full $10,000, and then the next year, replenishing it with $10,000, so on and so forth.
Okay, so was there much discussion at all about maybe changing it this time, or it decided just not to?
There's, on an annual basis, our spendable rate always requires a lot of discussion. So it's a huge topic, first for our investment committee in consultation with Mercer, who is our investment advisor and our governing board. And again, they're looking at the 7 factors from UPMIFA, but also community needs, and they're trying to balance all of that to ensure that they're protecting the principle, the corpus of the fund, while also serving the needs of, if it's a nonprofit endowment, the nonprofit, or if it's community needs, the community. So certainly it requires a lot of robust conversation. And we also look to peer institutions. So we look across those 800 community foundations and see what are our peers doing, what are other major universities doing, and I'm that informs also where we set
and Lawrence, I think it's important to note that the existence of community foundations only happens through the generosity of individuals and corporations and other nonprofit agencies who may have endowment funds. And so based on those funds that are opened up is how we continue to exist. And so our role is administrative and also being stewards of the intentions for those funds.
Okay. All right. Well, let me go ahead and ask this, because I know I did have this as a question earlier on. When there was discussion about the African-American Community Foundation and Letha Jones Henderson, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. Now, is she a local resident, or was she a local resident? Or?
She was a local resident. Both she and Miss Randolph are now deceased. And so there's the great, beautiful story I would like to say, and Whitney, I'll lean on you a little bit, of planned giving and legacy gifts, which is something that we like to have more conversation with our community residents in terms of leaving behind a legacy gift. And so that's how our competitive grant making continues to increase as individuals find it helpful to understand that that's a legacy that they will give to us. And so, Whitney, I'll ask if you'd like to share more about planned giving.
Sure, absolutely. So I think, that's a pillar of what we do at Foundation for the Carolinas. It's an opportunity for folks to think about the legacy that they want to leave once they're gone. Traditionally, I think people tend to think about the institutions that they supported during their life and how can they continue to support those institutions once they're gone. And oftentimes, a lot of our discretionary assets come through these types of bequests. And so, what I will say is that I think we're well positioned to meet individuals where they are and to design a planned gift that really honors who they were during their life. And there's maximum flexibility. So it can look any number of ways. But we are always appreciative when individuals trust us and are willing to leave these discretionary assets, typically within what we call a field of interest fund, meaning that the specific organization is not named, but the donor gives us an area of interest that they want to designate. So at Foundation for the Carolinas, they're called community impact funds, and we have 6 areas of impact that we're focused on, everything from the environment to education to animal welfare. And you can get even more granular if you like. Again, there's sort of maximum flexibility, but we are so appreciative when people entrust us with the legacy that they want to leave behind. And I will say, for some folks, that involves empowering the next generation. So it's not only leaving something for organizations that they really care about, but maybe they carve out a part of their estate and have their children or their grandchildren oversee the fund within grant-making parameters that they establish. So lots of options.
Okay. Oh, and just quickly about Ms. Henderson, I was just wondering, or I hope that there are some family members that are still around, and maybe they can go ahead and supply you with a picture of her, so we could actually see her, next.
We would love that. So if there are any viewers that can connect us, please do so. It's very difficult to find information about her, and we'd love to tell more of her story.
Okay. All right.
And it looks like, Lawrence, we may have a question, which Jeremy, thank you for posting. It says this might be off topic, but can you talk about fiscal sponsorship? And yes, we can certainly talk about fiscal sponsorship. And so I'll speak to the perspective of programs that have emerged or may exist in our communities where there is not a 501c3 IRS designation that has been approved for the agency yet, but that program would like to seek funds from us through one of our competitive grant cycles. And so we do then encourage and make a recommendation to that program to work with an existing nonprofit that does have that designation, so they can serve on their behalf and receive those funds so they can then be awarded. And I believe that's what you were speaking to. If not, please add some further context in the chat. And Whitney, I don't know if you have anything to add for that.
No, you did a great job.
Thanks. And happy to speak further offline if there are additional questions about fiscal sponsorships. You can certainly reach us.
Okay. Let me ask one other thing too, if I just may. Just as a follow-up about with the civic initiatives that were mentioned at the end, and the last one being this is racial equality, and that's become an issue, I guess probably more so of recent interest, especially. How much more has that really become a forefront issue within the community that you work with, as far as with grant makers and all?
I would say there's a lot of sensitivity and heightened awareness around it and looking at our community. And this also refers back to the Leading on Opportunity report when you talk about the segregation that our community does experience and where there are disparities. And so that's a topic that I'm really happy that is prevalent, that we're having in different funding circles, and looking at equity in our grant making and equity in everything that we're doing. Lots of listening, lots of learning from community. And so there's work to continue in that space.
Okay. Yeah, it just seemed to me that that is becoming more and more of a big issue in the foundation community. So just wanted to ask about that.
And that's true both for how we look at discretionary grant making opportunities, but also it's true for our clients as well. And we want to continue to empower them to think about issues of equity and racial justice.
Great. Okay. All right. Let's see. Looking to see if there's anything more with questions. Maybe going once, going twice, thrice. Is there anything else that you just wanted to add as far as what was being discussed earlier with the points that were brought up? Anything else maybe you can think of to add?
I guess I'll just mention it again, that we welcome conversations. We welcome getting to know organizations. We welcome one-pager fact sheets or anything you'd like to share with us so we can identify who's doing what in community. And specifically in the competitive grant making room, it's really helpful for our team to know who's doing what where. So if you're serving specific communities, where your touch points are, again, if you're collaborating, and just those general conversations of what agencies have identified as greatest areas of need. So please reach out to us. And also we welcome feedback on our grant making portal, as well as that entire process, the application, the evaluation piece. I'd like to say we're in a continuous cycle of improvement. And so we're wanting to ensure that our end users have a seamless process, and that we're not creating any additional burden for them if they're requesting grant funds or completing any of our evaluations. So we certainly welcome any feedback they have there as well.
And we really do take that to heart. So I would just like to underscore what Keva said, which is that please do give us feedback. And when we can improve and do things better and make things easier for you, we want to be helpful partners. I heard last year from a nonprofit executive director who I trust very much, who shared that she applied for 8 different grants at Foundation for the Carolinas, and that each grant application was unique. And that was helpful feedback for us to have and to contemplate. So things like that are helpful, and we do listen, and we do try to think about how we can adapt and change.
Okay, interesting. All right. All right, there it is. It says thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's not often that Whitney and I get to have this opportunity. So thank you for giving us the space to do this.
I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you.
All right. Thank you two very much. We really appreciate you joining us this evening. And thank you for, you can thank Timothy Hager as far as doing a go-between and setting things up for you to come this evening. We really appreciate all of your time and his effort too. And we hope that those who are joining us can also join us again next week when we conclude our 6-part series. And there was a message that was flashed about that. But we will conclude next week, and we hope for those of you who are interested will join us then. And again, if you have any questions, you can email our guests too in the future. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening.
Bye, you too.
Okay.